The galaxy was vast, ancient, and meticulously ordered. Species of unimaginable power and age had woven their civilizations into a web of peace and prosperity that spanned the stars. They had mastered technology, art, diplomacy, and everything in between, their way so far beyond humanity's reach that Earth was barely a speck on their radar. Captain Elena Graves had never been a believer in staying in the shadows. As the captain of the human starship Perseverance, she had fought against every expectation that Earth was too young, too unpolished, to have a place in the greater galactic community. Humans had built their reputation by surviving against the odds, making do with limited resources, innovating in ways others never imagined, and charging forward with a relentless drive to explore the stars. But no matter how much they achieved, humanity was still considered a novelty, a curiosity at best, an inconvenience at worst. And yet, the humans were always there, moving forward, never backing down. This time was different. Graves sat in the command center of the Perseverance, her eyes fixed on the large, flickering holoscreen. The transmission she'd intercepted was clear: a gathering on the peaceful planet of Elysium, a neutral world where the galaxy's most powerful species would convene for a summit. Every race that mattered would be there, ranging from the majestic, energy-based beings of the Zelrith to the ancient, almost godlike Valthorans, whose technology made human spacecraft look like toys. The invitation was exclusive, of course. Humans weren't even a consideration for such high-level diplomacy. The galaxy's elite had long ago agreed that Earth was simply too young, its people too volatile, to be included in any serious talks. The idea of humanity mingling with the powerful species that dominated the cosmos was laughable to most. But to Elena Graves, it was an insult. She leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping on the surface. The Perseverance was the fastest ship in the fleet, and she knew the data inside her command console better than anyone. The humans had made tremendous strides in the past few decades. Earth's first interstellar ships had now made their mark on various galactic frontiers, and humanity had brought more than just military might to the table. They'd shown ingenuity in every aspect of life, from medicine to trade to defense. Humanity had something the galaxy had overlooked: adaptability. Elena, her first officer, Lieutenant Marcus Holt, said from behind her, his voice cautious, "Are you really thinking of doing it? Crashing the summit?" Graves didn't respond immediately. She knew it was a risk, a huge one. But she was tired of waiting. She was tired of playing by the rules set by ancient species that didn't even recognize humanity's potential. If they wouldn't invite humanity to the table, then it was time to crash the party. She finally turned to Holt, her eyes flashing with a steely resolve. "We'll be the first ones to show the galaxy what humanity is capable of. They won't invite us. Fine. We'll make them notice." The crew of the Perseverance wasn't sure what they were getting into, but Graves knew. She had a plan. They would slip into the summit undetected, use stealth technology to blend in with the fleet of ambassadors, and, if necessary, speak their minds in front of the galaxy's elite. It wasn't about proving they belonged. It was about showing that they didn't need an invitation. Humans didn't ask for permission. They took what they wanted. The Perseverance glided through the void, its engines humming quietly, but the crew inside the ship was anything but calm. There was a palpable tension in the air, a mixture of excitement and fear. Captain Elena Graves had made her decision clear: crash the summit on Elysium, the one event the galaxy's elite had deemed too important to allow humans anywhere near it. The problem wasn't getting to Elysium. That part was simple enough. The Perseverance was one of the fastest ships humanity had ever built. It had stealth systems that could make even the most advanced sensor arrays struggle to detect its presence. But that wasn't the real issue. The issue was what came next, what happened when they arrived. They wouldn't be greeted with open arms. There would be no red carpet or polite introductions. They'd be intruders, outsiders, at best, ignored, at worst, attacked. If the crew wasn't careful, Their impulsive decision could lead to disaster. Inside the cramped briefing room, the senior officers sat in silence. Graves stood before them, her arms crossed, a determined look on her face. We all know the risks. We might get kicked out, or worse. But we're going. I want every one of you ready. Our mission is simple. Make them listen. Lieutenant Marcus Holt, her first officer, spoke first. Captain, I understand what you're saying, but he paused, trying to find the right words. This is a diplomatic event. We're talking about beings who could destroy our entire species with a thought. And you want us to crash their summit. Graves met his gaze. I'm not asking for a fight. I'm asking for a chance. A chance to prove that we belong here. A chance to show that humanity's ideas are worth hearing. If we don't take this step, we'll be waiting for an invitation for the rest of our lives. The room fell quiet again. Graves could feel the weight of her words settling in. This wasn't just a military operation or a diplomatic mission. It was something far deeper. This was humanity's opportunity to take control of its own future, to step away from the shadows of more powerful species and claim its place in the galaxy. Ensign Laura Diaz, the ship's communications officer, spoke up. We've got the technology to remain undetected, Captain. The stealth systems are solid. But if we're discovered, if they track us before we even land, there's no going back. I've run every scenario I could think of. And in every one, we're either expelled or worse. Graves turned toward her. I know, Laura, but we've never been afraid to take risks before. We've survived every test the universe has thrown at us. We adapt. And that's exactly what we're going to do here. The officers exchanged glances, each one processing the gravity of the situation in their own way. There was no consensus, no firm agreement among them. But one thing was certain. Whatever happened, they were all in this together. Holt leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. You know, Captain, when I signed up for this mission, I didn't think we'd be crashing the biggest diplomatic event in the galaxy. Graves smiled faintly. Maybe they didn't invite us, but that doesn't mean we can't make our own entrance. Let's make history. The decision had been made. No more second-guessing. The Perseverance would land on Elysium, no matter the consequences. They wouldn't be passive participants in the galaxy's affairs. They were going to challenge the status quo, show the universe that humanity had its own path to carve, and they would do it on their terms. Graves looked out the window, watching the stars blur past as the ship sped toward Elysium. She knew the risks. She knew the dangers. But she also knew that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in its technology. It was in its unyielding will to succeed, to push boundaries, and to take on the impossible. And now, humanity would show the galaxy exactly what it was capable of. The tension aboard the Perseverance grew thicker with every passing minute. The ship had been traveling for days, its destination drawing closer with each passing hour. But the closer they got to Elysium, the more uneasy the crew became. The thought of crashing a galactic summit, a gathering of the universe's most influential species, was a risk none of them had ever imagined taking. The stakes were higher than they'd ever been. Captain Elena Graves stood at the front of the command center, her gaze fixed on the holo-display. Elysium was a jewel of a planet, shimmering in the distance, a place where beings of unimaginable power and ancient wisdom gathered, sharing ideas, forming alliances, and making decisions that shaped the future of the galaxy. It was peaceful, serene, and, until now, utterly inaccessible to a young species like humanity. Approaching Elysium orbit, reported Lieutenant Holt, his voice steady but with a hint of tension. He adjusted the ship's trajectory on the controls, ensuring the Perseverance blended in seamlessly with the incoming diplomatic fleet. The Perseverance had been equipped with the best stealth technology humanity had ever developed. The ship's exterior had been modified to mirror the designs of several other diplomatic vessels, and the stealth systems were designed to keep it virtually invisible to sensors. Still, they knew that getting close would be one thing. Getting past the summit's tight security was another. "Stay alert," Graves said, her voice commanding but calm. "We don't know how tight their security is. Don't let anyone suspect we're not supposed to be here." The ship's scanners began to ping as they approached the heavily guarded planetary orbit. Elysium was surrounded by a perimeter of advanced sensor stations and defensive platforms, built to protect the elite visitors from any potential threats. Several fleets of ships from various alien species were already gathered in the vast space around the planet. Their designs were complex, shimmering with energy fields and sleek, otherworldly aesthetics. Compared to the human vessel, which was still a relatively crude work of metal and technology, the ships of the other species looked like masterpieces. As they passed the defensive perimeter, the Perseverance remained hidden in the shadows, avoiding the direct paths of the larger fleets. They were silent, invisible, until they received a communication request. "Unidentified vessel, state your intentions." The voice on the other end of the transmission was cold and demanding. It was a Valforan, one of the oldest and most powerful species in the galaxy. Their race was made of pure energy, their voices crackling with static, as though they existed on a frequency far beyond normal comprehension. Graves' heart raced. This was it, the moment of truth. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "This is the human starship Perseverance. We are here to attend the summit." There was a long pause on the other end. The Valforan didn't speak again. Instead, the transmission went silent, and Graves' heart skipped a beat. Had they been caught? Had their cover been blown? Then the response came, not from the Valforan, but from a neutral voice. "Proceed, Perseverance. You are authorized for landing." Graves exhaled slowly, trying to mask the relief she felt. This wasn't over yet, but they'd made it through the first hurdle. She turned to Holt, giving him a nod. "Let's get to the surface." As the Perseverance descended toward Elysium's surface, the crew stared out at the planet below them. It was a beautiful sight, with rolling plains of green and blue oceans stretching beneath them. The summit hall sat atop a cliff, a structure of translucent stone, gleaming under the distant sun. It looked like a place of peace, of serenity. But that would not be their experience. The Perseverance landed smoothly, its landing gear touching down with a soft hum. As the crew disembarked, they were greeted by a team of Elysian attendants, tall, serene beings with luminous skin and eyes that seemed to shimmer with ancient knowledge. They didn't react with the outrage or hostility that Graves had expected, but their eyes did linger on the humans. There was an unspoken judgment in the air. Graves knew this was only the beginning. Their presence would stir something, whether they were ready or not. The humans had arrived at a place they were never meant to be, and they would soon find out if the galaxy was willing to accept them, or if they were about to become the galaxy's biggest disruption. The summit hall of Elysium was unlike anything the crew of the Perseverance had ever seen. Towering arches shimmered with energy, casting dancing lights across the marble-like floor. The walls pulsed softly, almost as if the building itself was alive. Beings of all shapes and forms moved gracefully through the hall, some gliding, others floating, a few barely visible except for the ripples they made in the air. And then there were the humans. Captain Elena Graves led her crew through the main corridor, their presence impossible to ignore. Conversations stalled. Heads turned. A few delegates blinked, or their equivalent of blinking, trying to process what they were seeing. Humans, here, uninvited. It was like someone had led a group of wild animals into a royal ball. "They're staring," whispered Ensign Laura Diaz, keeping close behind Graves. Her eyes darted nervously from one alien figure to another. "Let them," Graves replied calmly. "They've ignored us long enough. Time they see us as we are." A trio of tall, crystalline beings known as the Tiari floated past, their voices a harmonic echo. One of them paused mid-glide to scan the humans. "Terrans," it said with detached curiosity. "You were not among the invited. Is this some form of protest?" Graves met its gaze without flinching. "No protest. We came to listen, to contribute. The tiara being tilted its shimmering head. How quaint. With that, it moved on. Graves didn't stop walking. Every step forward was a statement. The galaxy's elite had crafted this summit as a symbol of unity, yet that unity had never extended to Earth. Now the uninvited were here, and everyone knew it. They reached the observation floor, a vast balcony overlooking a garden, where species exchanged dialogue through thought, sound, or gesture. A few security drones hovered nearby, clearly keeping tabs on the humans. It was only a matter of time before someone more official took notice. And they did. A towering figure emerged from the crowd, robed in deep violet and adorned with glowing runes. It was a Valforan representative. Ambassador level, if Graves guessed correctly. His energy aura flared subtly as he approached, a clear sign of authority. "Captain Elena Graves," he said, his voice like thunder wrapped in silk. "I am Ambassador Varian of the Valforan Accord. You are here without sanction. Explain yourself." Graves stood tall. "We've watched for decades as this summit shaped galactic policy. Humanity has contributed to trade, exploration, and frontier defense. Yet we've never been given a voice. We're not here to disrupt. We're here to be heard." Varian's glow dimmed slightly, a sign of contemplation. "You presume much." "No," Graves said, her tone steady. "We've earned this." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Delegates nearby had stopped to listen. The Valforan said nothing more, but he didn't order their removal either. He simply turned and walked away. Was that a good sign? Holt muttered beside her. Graves allowed herself a small smile. It wasn't a no. Around them, the atmosphere shifted. Curiosity was replacing disapproval. The humans weren't just an anomaly anymore. They were a conversation starter. And the galaxy, for the first time, was beginning to listen. By the next day, whispers of the humans' arrival had spread through every corner of the summit. Delegates from ancient empires, scholars from forgotten star clusters, even synthetic life forms who rarely interacted with organics, all were talking about Earth's bold move. Some were amused, others offended. A few were curious. Captain Elena Graves sat at a long, curved table in one of the side forums, a lower-level discussion chamber reserved for minor policy debates. Not exactly center stage, but still a start. Around her, smaller delegations shared theories on trade, security, and interspecies ethics. Most ignored her presence. Until she spoke. "I disagree," Graves said calmly, addressing a tall, amphibious diplomat from the Nixel Union. "If border protections rely solely on automated patrols, they'll fail. Pirates adapt faster than static defenses. You need flexible responses. You need people on the ground." The chamber quieted. Several beings turned toward her, surprised she'd interrupted. The Nixel diplomat raised a fronted brow. "And what does Earth know of border defense? Your territory spans barely a sliver of space." Graves didn't flinch. "That's precisely why we're good at it. We don't have the luxury of sprawling empires. Every inch we hold, we had to earn, against raiders, hostile worlds, and isolation. We don't rely on size. We rely on grit." A few murmurs rippled through the forum. Some delegates glanced at one another, intrigued. The Nixel diplomat gave a dismissive wave of its translucent hand. "Emotion has no place in strategic policy." Graves leaned forward, her voice steady. "It's not emotion. It's experience. We've fought with less, and we've survived. Our strategies work not because they're theoretical, but because we've lived them." Across the room, a member of the Keiteri Trade Conclave, a reptilian species known for pragmatism, let out a low, amused growl. "Perhaps we should hear more from the Terran." That single remark shifted the energy in the room. Suddenly, the humans were no longer a novelty. They were a wild card. By the time the session ended, several delegates had approached Graves privately. Some offered polite curiosity, others cautious respect. A few asked real questions about Earth's developments in energy, AI ethics, and survival on volatile planets. News of the humans' presence made its way into the larger hall soon after. There, Valforan Ambassador Virian spoke with other senior figures. He didn't mention Graves by name, but he didn't deny her either. Back on the Perseverance, the crew watched a Galactic broadcast recapping summit highlights. Near the end, a brief image flickered on the screen. Captain Elena Graves, standing in that side chamber, speaking with purpose. They weren't laughing anymore. "Looks like we're trending," Dias said with a grin. "Let them talk," Graves replied. "We're not here to be liked. We're here to be respected." And with every word she spoke, every eye that turned their way, humanity's presence grew harder to ignore. The party hadn't invited them, but now, everyone was wondering what the humans would say next. The summit had started to shift. What was once a flawlessly orchestrated gathering of the galaxy's most ancient and powerful species now had a ripple running through it, and at the center of that ripple stood humanity, unexpected, uninvited, and completely unwilling to be ignored. Captain Elena Graves could feel the shift wherever she walked. Delegates no longer turned away when they saw her. Some even nodded in greeting. A few invited her to sit in minor sessions, where she spoke with the same directness and confidence that had carried her crew across hostile space. But not everyone appreciated the disruption. In the early evening, Graves was summoned to a restricted-level chamber. Only 10 individuals were present. 9 of them represented the core races, the species who had, for over 1,000 years, controlled every major summit. The 10th seat, temporarily, was hers. Ambassador Virian stood as she entered. "Captain Graves, you've stirred considerable attention." "I didn't come to hide," she replied, keeping her voice even. A skeletal being known as a Psionic leaned forward, its voice harassed. "Your presence undermines the structure of this gathering. There are protocols, processes. You ignored all of them." Graves met its hollow gaze, because the processes were built to keep voices like ours out. We waited. We applied. We were dismissed, over and over. Eventually, you stopped waiting for the door to open and kick it down. The chamber fell into a tense silence. A tall insectoid diplomat from the Hive Accord hissed, "You speak boldly for a species barely out of its own star system." Graves tilted her head. "We speak from the edge, where survival isn't guaranteed and progress comes hard. That gives our voice weight." Virian raised a hand, his energy aura pulsing. "Enough. We are not here to debate legitimacy. We are here to decide what happens next. Your actions, while bold, violate the summit structure." "Then fix the structure," Graves said. "You created a galaxy that claims unity while silencing the voices that haven't existed for 10,000 years. That's not unity. That's a closed loop." She expected pushback, anger, maybe even a formal expulsion, but instead she saw hesitation. The K-Terry representative shifted in its seat. Perhaps it's time for the loop to open. Murmurs followed. Not agreement, not yet, but uncertainty, doubt. And doubt, Graves knew, was the first crack in any wall. The meeting ended without a verdict. As Graves exited, Holt waited outside. "How bad was it?" "They're rattled," she said. "And when giants start to wobble, that's when you press forward." Back aboard the Perseverance, messages began to arrive from mid-tier civilizations. Some offered support, others asked for cooperation, or at least a conversation. The summit could no longer pretend humanity didn't exist. But in the shadows of Elysium's shining halls, others were beginning to take notice too. Ones who didn't welcome change. Ones who would rather silence the humans permanently. The party wasn't just heating up. It was about to boil over. The summit was no longer business as usual. On the surface, everything continued with practiced grace. Formal speeches, diplomatic rituals, and sessions filled with complex negotiations. But beneath it all, a current of unease had begun to swirl. The humans hadn't just walked into the party. They'd lit a fire in the middle of it. Captain Elena Graves knew something was coming. The air felt tighter. Conversations with other delegates were now laced with caution. Even allies spoke more quietly, as though walls had suddenly grown ears. And then came the explosion. It wasn't large. No one died. But a shockwave ripped through one of the secondary summit wings in the early hours of the morning. The blast blew out a corridor, triggered emergency shielding, and forced dozens of delegates into lockdown. The Perseverance's crew was among the first blamed. Security surrounded the human quarters within minutes. Drones scanned the walls, sensors swept the crew's personal items, and an inquiry team demanded access to every system on board their ship. Graves stood in the middle of the inspection, calm but burning inside. "You really think we came all this way to blow up a hallway?" Ambassador Virion appeared soon after, his energy signature flaring like a storm. "The evidence is inconclusive," he said, voice sharp. "But there are whispers. Some want you expelled immediately." "Let me guess," Graves replied. "The same ones who never wanted us here to begin with." Virion said nothing. His silence was louder than any denial. But the humans weren't alone anymore. As the investigation unfolded, several non-core delegates stepped forward. The Kiteri released a statement condemning the attempt to use the incident as an excuse for suppression. A mid-tier alliance from the Norris Belt offered their own analysis, one that traced the blast to a planted micro-device of clearly non-human origin. And then came the twist. Video footage, recovered from a maintenance drone, showed a cloaked figure placing the device. It wasn't human. It wasn't even a species known for open conflict. It was a high-ranking member of the Nixel Union, the same delegate who dismissed Graves in the forum days earlier. The footage leaked within hours. What had begun as an accusation against humanity became a scandal of galactic proportions. Suddenly, it wasn't just about the humans anymore. It was about truth, about who controlled the narrative and who feared losing that control. Inside the summit hall, the mood shifted again. This time, it wasn't curiosity. It was outrage. Quiet species found their voices. Marginalized worlds began to speak up. And throughout it all, the humans stood steady, no longer a question mark, but a symbol. Captain Graves returned to the side chamber where she'd first spoken. This time, it was full. "We didn't cause the explosion," she said, "but maybe it was always going to happen. Because when the system's that brittle, all it takes is one spark." And humanity, it seemed, had become the spark the galaxy could no longer ignore. The summit chamber was packed. Delegates filled every seat, balcony, and corridor. Even the normally aloof observers from the Rim syndicates hovered in silent formation above the main floor. Something was about to happen, something the galaxy hadn't seen in generations. At the center of it all stood Captain Elena Graves. The core races, still seated in their high positions, looked down with carefully neutral expressions. Their grip on authority had been shaken, but not yet broken. The incident with the explosion and the failed attempt to frame the humans had exposed cracks in their control. Now the whole galaxy was watching to see what would come next. Graves took a breath, not because she was nervous, but because this moment mattered. "For centuries," she began, her voice clear and steady, "this summit has claimed to represent unity, cooperation, progress, but only for those who were allowed in the room." A ripple moved through the crowd. Some nodded. Others listened with guarded interest. Earth knocked on the door for years. "You ignored us. We didn't start a war. We didn't send threats. We just kept going, building, exploring, surviving." She turned, looking not at the core, but at the balconies filled with smaller delegations. "But we weren't the only ones shut out. I see dozens of species here, brilliant, brave, with stories worth hearing. Why are your voices missing from the decisions that shape your future?" Now the core races were shifting in their seats. A Valforan elder rose slowly. "Change must come gradually, Captain Graves. Structure is what prevents chaos." Graves didn't miss a beat. "Structure is fine if it serves everyone. But when it only protects the powerful, it becomes a cage. There was silence, not resistance, not protest, just consideration. Then, to the surprise of everyone, a delegate from the Kiteri rose. "We move to extend Earth the provisional seat," she announced. "Equal in vote, equal in voice." Gasps echoed across the chamber. No species outside the core had ever made such a proposal. But one by one, others followed. The Norris Belt, the Rim syndicates, even a hesitant representative from the Hive Accord gave a subtle nod. Ambassador Virion stood once more, glowing brighter than usual. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, finally, "Let the galaxy decide." A vote was called. And for the first time in the summit's long history, the chamber lit up, not with the colors of the core, but with the brilliance of the many. 100 small lights, blinking in agreement. Humanity had not just crashed the party. They had helped rewrite the guest list. Later, back aboard the Perseverance, the crew watched the broadcast replay. Graves stood by the viewport, Earth a pale dot in the stars behind her. "So," Holt said, smiling, "what now?" Graves crossed her arms. "Now, we speak, we listen, and we keep the door open for everyone. Because sometimes the uninvited guest is exactly who the party needs."